Right. So this video is a performance review of Jen Silverman's play Bonnets, How Ladies of Good Breeding Are Induced to Murder, formed at the Penn State Theatre department, directed by Jenny Lamb. So this is a really, really cool play. As a sort of preliminary piece of information, this was written as part of a concerted program. It says, jointly commissioned by the Big Ten theater programs to create new plays written by women and with significant roles for female actors between the ages of 18 and 30. So that's actually a really, really good thing for university theater programs, because while there are some good roles for college-age women, a lot of the most famous plays don't really have great female roles. And so this idea of bringing in more female playwrights, more female parts and stuff like this is actually a really, really good thing in terms of actor training. It gets compelling, interesting, dynamic parts for college-age women, which means that students in theater programs get to actually play roles written with their age range in mind. So it's a really, really good thing. The show itself, the play itself, is incredibly good, incredibly interesting, particularly if you're somebody like me who likes history plays. One of my favorite genres is the history play. And Bonnets gives us 3 different places and time periods. We have the French, the Parisian court in the era of Louis XIV, the Sun King. We have Puritan New England in the colonial period, early colonial period, mid-1600s. And we have Victorian England. So we have 3 very different historical settings, 3 very different contexts, and yet one of the things that ties them all together is the lack of choice that women have faced in different historical circumstances, and how those limitations, those social structures that constrict women's choices could, conceptually, lead to a murderous reaction. So, in the French scenes, we have Claire and Valerie. Let me remember which one is which. Yeah. Claire is a somewhat unhappily married woman. She is Valerie's sister-in-law. Valerie is apparently a notorious poisoner who's just like, yeah, it's Paris these days. Everybody's poisoning their lovers. It's no big deal. I've poisoned a bunch of mine. Claire is like, I've never had a satisfying sexual encounter with my husband, and I've never had an affair. When you're done with your current lover, before poisoning him, can I have him as a lover? And Valerie's like, sure, as long as you poison him. And Claire's like, yes, I've got this. So we have that set up. Then we go to Victorian England with Webster, who's a servant of Miss Walcott. Miss Walcott is a very domineering, almost like sort of 1980s capitalist kind of figure, where she's very much like, everybody's out for themselves, you've got to get yours, kindness is a weakness, etc., etc. Webster is her servant, and Webster's continually being criticized, continually being ordered around, etc., etc. Webster is actually in love with Georgette, Mrs. Walcott's daughter, but of course it's Victorian England, and so you can't directly come out and say that, both because same-sex relationships are not publicly discussed, but also because Webster is a servant, and Georgette is her employer's daughter, technically. And so we've got that. And then the third scenario, we have prudence and fortitude. Prudence is having an affair with a married man named Daniel, and she wants him to no longer be a married man named Daniel. She wants him to be an unmarried man so that she can marry him. And fortitude, who is another Puritan woman, is like, hey man, rules is rules. You gotta follow the rules. You can't, like, go around murdering people and whatnot. That's not okay. Just, you gotta follow the rules because they're there for a reason. And so that's our third scenario. All of this is overseen by God. God is somewhat cynical. God has an interesting relationship to the question of data, in this case being human experience. And God has an interesting relationship to morality and to questions of ethics. And so God is this somewhat cynical figure who sets up the framework for the things that are going to happen, but doesn't necessarily seem to have control over them or even any sort of influence whatsoever. So it's an interesting approach to creating what is typically regarded as an all-powerful deity. This is an almost exclusively female cast. We do see Daniel briefly, and we see Laurent, who is Valerie's lover, who becomes Claire's lover. But they are really there to develop the women's conflicts, rather than being there sort of in their own right. They're not, like, we aren't following their conflicts necessarily. We're following the women's conflicts, and they are objects within those conflicts. So it works really, really well. Now, I could see this being performed, I'll say straight. And what I mean by that is, like, you could costume the Victorian characters in proper Victorian garb. You could costume the Puritan characters in proper early colonial Massachusetts garb, etc., etc. You could do it historically. The Penn State Theatre production, directed by Lamb, did not do that. There is a much more sort of riot girl, punk rock aesthetic that I think actually really, 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 really worked. It was very, very good because, I mean, one of the things with, like, Riot Girl is it sort of brings in that militant feminist aesthetic along with the punk sensibilities of, like, DIY, rip things up and make them anew, challenging social and sartorial conventions and things like this. And so there's that edge to it that came across really well visually. And the performers were amazing. The performers across the board were really, really good. absolutely no critiques whatsoever of any of these actors. Cassidy Brown played God in the production that I saw. She's a swing actor, an understudy, basically. Claire was played by Cece Garcia. Valerie played by Lucy Snyder. Mrs. Walcott, Rafaela Torchea. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing any of these names. Georgette by Drake Ariel. Webster by Malcolm McKenzie. Prudence by Sophie Nicholson. Fortitude by Lucy Martin. Mistress Stone, who I didn't talk about, but she's another character in the Puritan New England section, by Anna Faris. Laurent, played by Justin Roldan, and Daniel, played by Dylan Henderson. Really, really good across-the-board performances. And one of the things that I think helped create really dynamic and interesting performances is the blending within this play. It is a very dynamic energy, because you have these moments that are like deep and philosophical. Like, there's a point when Claire has invited Laurent into her boudoir, and she is trying to figure out how to articulate what it is that she wants, because she doesn't just want sex, she wants something deeper than that. And they sort of do this exercise where he covers her ears and she covers her eyes, and she says what she wants without being able to hear herself and to sort of judge the words that she's saying. And it is this profound short speech about sort of struggling to know who she is and what her place in the world is, why she is here, what she is meant to be doing with her life. And it is this great, profound speech, but then you also have these moments of humor, whether it's anachronistic humor with modern references or things like that, or whether it's comic timing between the characters, things like this. So you have those elements, this mix of philosophy and humor. You have this mix of these profound moments of deep angst and concern about how to be in the world, but those are balanced with these much lighter, funnier moments. And so overall, it was an incredibly good show. If I have one critique, it's a very, very minor critique, which is that the play is somewhat monologue heavy, which normally I'm not a big fan of, but I mean, that's one of those, if I had to find something to nitpick, it would be that. I actually think the monologues often work to help develop the characters and the ethical concerns that they have about the world. So I do. It's not a big critique. It's not a thing that I would really insist makes or breaks the show. For instance, it's a minor thing in what I think is otherwise a really incredible show with really incredible performances.